Hello to Pioneer viewers. We continue to keep the Russia-Ukraine war on our agenda. We would like to share with you the details and analysis of the war. As the war conditions become more difficult, the solutions of the parties to the war become more and more interesting. Although political leaders made some moves to manage this crisis, it is very difficult to reach a permanent solution. In times of war, it is important to receive international support. Production processes disturbed by war can continue uninterruptedly thanks to the support of allies. Allies also contribute greatly to supply of weapons, human resources, and economic support. For these reasons, even if the necessary procedures for going to war have been completed, every contingency must be calculated to start the war. It can be assumed that Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine lacked an in-depth plan and strategy. An examination of Russia's war discipline and military will reveal the reasons for this. The war between Ukraine and Russia started a long time ago. The two countries have been at war for a long time, and the intensity and agenda of the war changes from the day to day. Since the Ukrainian army began its counteroffensives, there has been a significant reduction and restrictions in the movements of the Russian troops. As a result, the Russian army is on the defensive and the Ukrainian army is on the offensive. The course of the war concerns the Western world as much as it concerns Ukraine, Europe, and the US, which has shown significant reactions against Russia's aggressive policies, continue to support Ukraine's struggle. The statements made by the US in recent days are actually indicative of these situations. In the statement made by the US president, implicit threats were sent to Russia. In Russia, the situation is quite complicated. Vladimir Putin, who could not achieve the results he wanted in the surveys conducted throughout Russia, creates a very anxious impression. Let's analyze the US president's statements and the poll results in Russia together. As the Pioneer, we continue to report on the Russia-Ukraine war. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so that you don't miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. I also read all your comments on our videos. Please continue to share your ideas about our content in the comments with us. Let's start if you are ready. The Pioneer reports. Recently, US President Joe Biden made some statements about the ongoing war in Ukraine. President Biden warned his entourage that if the Kremlin is successful in its war against Ukraine, the United States is at risk of entering into a direct conflict with Russia. Overnight, Russia launched the largest air attack on Ukraine since the war began, Biden said in statements released the other day. It is a stark reminder to the world that nearly 2 years after this devastating war, Putin's goal remains unchanged. He seeks to destroy Ukraine and subject its people. It must be stopped, he said. Biden's statements mentioned support for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Biden said in a statement that Ukrainian forces have successfully intercepted a number of missiles and drones launched by Russia thanks to Kiev's disposable air defense systems. Biden had previously warned Republicans that withholding aid to Ukraine could pose a security threat to the NATO alliance and then to the United States. The White House's final aid package for Kiev, totaling $250 million, was also announced last week. Biden is showing the scale of the threat by saying that the risks of this struggle extend far beyond Ukraine. Russia is undermining stability in the region, he said, affecting the entire NATO alliance, the security of Europe, and the future of the transatlantic relationship. When dictators and autocrats are allowed to participate in play politics in Europe, the risk of the direct United States withdrawal increases. The consequences reverberate around the world. We cannot let down our allies and partners. We cannot let Ukraine down. History will judge harshly those who do not answer the call of the freedom. Following Biden's statements of reactions to Russia were made from a different part of the world. Russia's aggression and attacks targeting the stability in the region have been condemned by the world public opinion. Russia's actions against civilians and attacks against the laws of the war are being investigated by various judicial authorities. It is well known that the US has been supporting Ukraine since the beginning of the war. National politics within the US also needs to acknowledge the significant support for Ukraine. The debates in the Congress sometimes tie the hands of US President Joe Biden. Biden, who does not want to make a move contrary to congressional decision, is waiting for the Congress to recognize the danger. The situation in Russia seems quite complicated. In a survey conducted across Russia recently, Russian citizens was asked about their expectations from the new year. The survey results revealed quite surprising answers. According to the survey, half of the Russian citizens hope that the war in Ukraine will end in 2024. The respondents were asked that they wished for the fellow citizens in the New Year's, and the most popular answer was peaceful skies and the end of special military operations. As you know, Moscow uses the term special military operations to describe the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine. Only 6% of the respondents said that they wished for Russian victory. The poll results come as the war in Ukraine moved towards the 2-year mark in early February, and Putin is running for the 5th term in Russia's presidential elections scheduled for March. Various research groups have been conducting polls in Russia since the early days of the war. Other polls have shown that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is becoming less and less supportive among the citizens. A poll conducted by the Moscow-based research group last October found that only 12% of respondents supported the war. In the previous poll, 22% of the respondents said they supported the war in a similar survey conducted by the group in February. Putin has said Moscow will not end its aggression until it's achieved demilitarization and neutrality in Ukraine. He also accused the West of pushing Russia to war because of its influence over the Kyiv government. But polls shows that Putin's support is also declining in Russia. And the Russian people don't want Putin's warmongering style of governance, because it is the Russian people who have to deal with all the hardships of the war. Although Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky shows no sign of seeking negotiations with Putin, polls in Ukraine also shows governing support for Kyiv and the end of the war. Ukrainians want the war to the end, but they also want the Russian occupation to end. They accept the war will only end if the Russians withdraw, otherwise they say they will fight to the end. How do you evaluate the statements of the US President Joe Biden? What do you think the consequences of the risks of the hot conflict between the US and Russia could be? How do you evaluate the results of the polls conducted in Russia? What do you think are the conditions for the end of the war? We care about your opinions. Please share it with us.